So, while we are here looking at the fan art section stuff, I need to ask you a question. Hypothetically, for the sake of argument, do you like legendary creatures? And if you do, then you're probably already here because you're playing Commander and you like legendary creatures that do cool things. That's what Commander is all about, after all. And making enemies at the table, that's another thing that Commander's all about. So, why do I ask that? Well, because today's Commander is going to give you everything you want if you really like legendary creatures. What's better than one Commander? Having like 28. So today's Commander is Jeru and Hazet, and like with all of these videos in this section, these are $15 decks. You can build the 99 of the deck for $15 on TCG Player. Please use the optimizer, and the Commander can be $1 or less. And I did say that I'm going to try to explore more of these partner, not partner Commanders. So yeah, Jeru and Hazet, everybody. Let's go ahead and talk about what these guys are doing. So, Jeru and Hazet says, as long as you have one or fewer cards in hand, it has Vigilance and Haste. Now, we're not really going to be trying to abuse that part of the ability that much, because getting ourselves to Hellbent status is not really the most comfortable thing you can do in a game of Magic the Gathering. However, its second ability is what we are going to be building around. Now, whenever Jeru and Hazet attack, look at the top 6 cards of your library. Exile a legendary creature from among them, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And until end of turn, you may cast the card without paying its mana cost. This means we have an impulse draw engine that lets us, root around the top 6 cards of our deck in our deck. And there's a few angles we can go with this. If we went the extra combats angle, the deck would become more mana hungry than I think we'd be able to support in Boros colors without dipping into some very expensive cardboard. So we're going to go with a strategy of Jeru and Hazet touches the board, and then every turn we plan on dropping down one big haymaker that needs to be answered by the table. And if the table does not run enough removal, boy howdy, that seems like a problem they can solve by using one of my videos where I've talked about running more removal in Magic the Gathering. So there's the strategy. It's very straightforward. We are going to be turning cardboard sideways at people, and we're going to be using a commander that lets us turn more cardboard sideways at people because it pulls more cardboard out of our deck. So what are some of the big legends we are trying to get to? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. We have 9 big legends. There's 28 legendaries in the deck total, legendary creatures that is, but there are 9 that only have the purpose of being big and clunky and punching people in the face. So let's start with Rorik's Blade Wing, a 6-mana flying haste creature that, if we have it in our hand, we'll be able to make good use of the flying and haste, but if we end up getting it off the commander, it's going to pop out on the board and just be a 6/5 flyer. Now, people can only take so many 6/5 flyers to the face before they die, so Rorik's is still going to fit very well here, and with its very low budget, it ends up filling out a slot very, very nicely. Then we have Zalto the Fire Giant Duke. Whenever he's dealt damage, we get to venture into the dungeon, and he's a 7/3 with Trample. That dungeon ability will become more relevant as we go further into the deck. Chroma Angel of Fury, a 6/6 that can't be countered, has Flying, Trample, and Pro-White and Pro-Blue, as well as having a fire-breathing effect. Also, if we don't have enough mana to pay for her outright, we do have the ability to morph her from the ability on Jeru and Hazet, which does let us split her cost over multiple turns. And then we have Anya Merciless Angel, a 5-mana Boros commander that says she gets 3/3 for each opponent whose life total is less than half of their starting life total. We are literally a deck built around throwing down Haymaker cards and getting people's life chunked down, so she should be able to get rather huge. And as long as an opponent's life total is less than half their starting life total, she has Indestructible. This is one of our linchpins. If we can get Anya out in the mid-game when everybody's lives are starting to look a little closer to the lethal area, she's going to do us a ton of work. Then we have Othari Sun's Glory. I've built an entire deck around this because I love the effect. I love what it does, but it's a flying lifelink haster, and anytime it attacks, you get an experience counter, and you create rebels for every experience counter that you have. And you can tap and untap rebel you control, return Othari from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So we can use this over and over again. If our opponents start getting rid of it, as long as we've got rebels left over from Othari's effect, we will be safe and sound. Now, the next one we got to talk about is come on. It's a deck with red in it. You know it's going to have Atali in it. So Atali Primal Storm 6/6. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of every player's library, and then you can cast any number of those spells without paying their mana cost. You ignore timing restrictions. Itali is thrown in like every single red precon, so you probably have one lying around, maybe like wrapped up in some toilet paper or something. Itali is a fantastic card and a wonderful hit off Jeru and Hazet, and a perfect combat commander to be, you know, the 27th lieutenant of the deck. Then we have Zetalpa Primal Dawn. I know people clown on Zetalpa, but this is probably one of the most perfect decks to run him in. Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Indestructible. If a Zetalpa's on the board for more than a turn or two, the game is basically concluded, but there's some reasons why Zetalpa's really strong in this deck in particular. We have some very cheeky ways of making sure our legendary creatures have added stats, +2/+2, +1/+1, any number of things that can just shove power onto legendaries. So Zetalpa's going to be making a lot of use of that Flying and Double Strike. Also, removing a Zetalpa's not easy. It's got Indestructible, and people forget about that. I forget about that. I tried killing one with a hurricane in a tournament once and proved that I don't know how to read. Finally, in the legendary creatures slot, we have Venomous Lorehold. Whenever Velomachus Lorehold attacks, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery with mana value less than or equal to his power from among those cards, and then just play it basically for free. Put the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. Now, the deck runs about 11 instants or sorceries, so the likelihood of us hitting it with Velomachus is about a 50-50. But anytime we do get to cast, like, say, a free Generous Gift off of his effect or anything else, we are always going to be in a very, very happy place. Or even if we get something like Deafening Clarion, which is in the deck, that's a fun card to hit off of him. Or something else we got to talk about in the board wipe section, we can get Urza's Ruinous Blast off of this, which is a devastating thing to throw at our opponents off of Velomachus's ability. Mana value less than or equal to, so Urza's Ruinous Blast will always be available unless somebody's got like Elish Norn on the board or something. Finally, in the Legends Matter section, we have the Thran Temporal Gateway. This card lets us put historic permanents from our hand onto the battlefield at instant speed on anybody's turn as long as we sink 4 mana into it. As you've seen, a lot of our big legendaries do have a pretty hefty mana cost, so this can be used to both cheat some of our legendaries into the board while also giving us the added benefit of going, hey, so, now that the last player has ended their turn, I'm just going to get my Zetalpa or Itali on the board for 4 mana and then just swing it at you as if it had haste. So, Thran Temporal Gateway, very, very powerful effect, very, very fun effect to drop onto players. But I did show that we have a lot of high mana cards, so let's go ahead and talk about the ramp package in the deck and why we've made some of the choices we have. Beginning with Core Cartographer, if you're running white decks and you want ramp, Core is just a fantastic card to shove in. It lets you search your deck for any Plains card, put it on the battlefield. That includes dual lands, so you can just get, and if you're playing the base version of the deck, like Sacred Peaks will come out with this, easy, or if you happen to be playing an upgraded version of the deck, sure, get a Sacred Foundry or something out of it as well. Drop this down and immediately get yourself access to a Surveil land. Core Cartographer is just a fantastic card. Unstable Obelisk is ramp that also can be removal later in the game. Marble Diamond and Fire Diamond both get to exist as 2 mana rocks. Mirror Convert is a 2 mana rock attached to a creature. Mind Stone's a 2 mana rock that can sack itself to let you draw a card. Wayfarer's Bauble can sack itself to give us mana out of the deck. Talisman of Conviction is... I'm glad we can put a talisman in one of these decks. It's very hard to fit them in sometimes because they tend to be expensive, but nobody likes Boros, so this actually fits in pretty easy. Planar Atlas, when it comes onto the battlefield, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our deck and put a land from among them on top of the deck, basically guaranteeing a land drop in the early game. Command Sphere is a draw power card later in the game when we are running out of steam, but is a 3 mana rock otherwise. Captain Lannery Storm is a legendary creature we can get off Jeru and Hazet that makes tokens whenever it swings. Hedron Archive is another card that can draw cards later in the game after it's served its purpose, but otherwise gives us 2 mana when we use it. The Iron Crag is a legendary artifact that is a 2 mana rock, and also anytime one of our legends touch the board, we can change the Iron Crag into a Hero's Legacy, which can give any of our legendary creatures 3/3, which is great if we can drop it onto something like, say, Zetalpa. Then we have Glowing Dwarf Emissary. Whenever you cast a historic spell, make a treasure token once per turn. Also, you can sack a treasure to goad a creature. Our deck is filled to the brim with historic spells, whether they be artifacts, the legendary creatures we're running, or even legendary cards outside of that. So we are always going to be able to get this effect off over and over and over again. But we also need to make sure that our opponents are not winning the game outright as we are playing, and we have a few ways to facilitate that. Let's go ahead and look over to the removal and interaction package, where we are sitting at 10 dedicated removal cards, but we have some cheeky ways to mess around with that too. But let's start with Make Your Move, a new card from Karlov Manor. Blow up an artifact, blow up an enchantment, or a creature with power 4 or greater. Disenchant gets rid of an artifact or enchantment. Abrade gets rid of a creature or artifact. Rip Apart gets rid of a creature, artifact, or enchantment. I say get rid of, it deals 3 damage, but you're almost always going to be aiming this at a creature that will die as a result of it. Path to Metal deals 1 damage to every creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste, which is a great swath of cards in the game. And anytime you attack with at least 2 creatures that have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, and or Haste, which we have a lot of, legendary creatures usually are stacked up with them, we can change it over to Metzali, the Tower of Triumph, which lets us deal 2 damage to every opponent, or choose any creature at random that attacked this turn and destroy the creature. So this is not only land ramp for our deck, but this lets us have a card that sits in the back, and anytime our opponents swing with creatures, we can just tap the card, and then at random, one of those creatures is getting destroyed, and we will always benefit from this effect. Then we have Yoven. Yoven, you can tap 3 red mana and tap him to blow up any non-creature artifact. Soul Rings, Mana Crypt, stuff like that, Bolas' Citadels, they've all got to go, and Yoven can kill all of them while being a legendary creature. Kamal Pitfighter can tap to Lightning Bolt anything, and it has haste, so yes, it's overcosted for a Lightning Bolt, but it's a repeatable Lightning Bolt, and that's fine. Speaking of repeatable lightning bolts, Drakaseth Maw of Drakaseth, jeez, I can't speak. Drakaseth Maw of Flames is a 7/7 flying dragon that whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target, and then 3 damage to up to 2 other targets. This is 2 lightning bolts and a... I want to say Lightning Axe. Is it Lightning Axe? Is Lightning Axe 4 damage or 5 damage? I'll have to go look at Is It Phoenix Pioneer decks and try to remember. But Drakaseth gets 4 bits of damage in every time it swings. The 7/7 of its body, the 2 instances of 3/3 on people, and then the 4 damage to any target as well. Use this to burn your opponent's life down, or use this primarily to remove 3 threats off the board every swing. Then we have Commander Sophia Daguar. The Commander has Flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, blow up any legendary permanent a player controls, and then you create a junk token. A perfect card to use to get rid of other people's commanders. And then finally, Generous Gift. Destroy any target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So this can get rid of lands. This can get rid of damn near anything. But that's not all the removal we're running. We also have some board wipes we need to talk about. I said we have some interesting ways to screw with that as well. So let's look at the 4 board wipes we have, starting with Austere Command. Choose 2, blow up all artifacts, enchantments, all creatures with mana value 3 or less, or mana value 4 or greater. Because our deck tends to be a very big and tall creatures deck, we can use Austere Command to get rid of all of the little chump blockers, or get rid of problematic enchantments, as we are very, very low on those. The deck only has 5, and this can be a asymmetric board wipe if we are planning it out correctly. Then we have Deafening Clarion, a 3 mana damage to all creatures, or giving all creatures we control lifelink until end of turn. We can do both, though, so typically we're going to use this to wipe our opponent's chump blockers out of the way, and then we're going to swing with a bunch of our legendary creatures and get a bunch of life in the process, letting us win War of Attritions later in the game. Urza's Ruinous Blast exiles all non-land permanents if they are not legendary. Perfect for us, as most of the cards in our deck are legendary in one way, shape, or form. And then Ashling the Pilgrim, a 2 mana 1/1 we can drop early in the game, and we can pay 2 mana to put a 1/1 counter on Ashling, but if it's the 3rd time, she gets to deal damage equal to her power to each creature and each player. So most of our deck does not consist of cards that have toughness of 3 or lower. Most of it is big haymakery legendaries, or if they are weaker legendaries, they're usually fine taking a hit or two. We also have ways to pump the toughness of our legendaries up, so oftentimes we'll be able to use Ashling to keep token players honest. We can sink 6 mana into this in a single turn in order to get her to nuclear levels immediately, or we can pay a little bit of mana every turn until she gets up to the point where she can kill damn near anything, and then one turn at instant speed when people decide that it's time to go off, we just go, hey, I'm going to pay 6, Ashling blows up everything. Just a pocket nuke we get to use damn near forever, and it is perfect at that. But we also need to be able to draw into our threats, and our commander cannot be our only draw engine. So let's talk about the draw engine of the deck, starting with Sophenia Spear Sage Deserter. Whenever she attacks, investigate once for each non-token attacking creature, which we are going to be attacking with a lot of creatures, so this card will be able to give us a lot of cards. Seize the Spoils gives us a treasure while also discarding a card and drawing 2 cards. Treasures are good for us because we desperately need the extra ramp. Collector's Vault lets us discard a card and draw a card and create a treasure token. Again, more ramp on top of the draw. Pirate's Pillage lets us discard a card, draw 2 cards, and make 2 treasure tokens. Again, more abilities to ramp while also digging through our deck. Sarah Jane Smith, whenever you cast a historic spell, investigate once each turn. Perfect for us because we are always casting historic spells. Speaking of historic spells, Mazzolanti the Great Door. Draw, discard attached to it. We can also flip it for a big boost in mana later in the game if we so choose. And then we have Board the Weatherlight. 2 mana, look at the top 5 cards of our library, reveal a historic spell from among them, put it into our hand, which is perfect for us because most of the cards in our deck are historic, either by virtue of being legendary or being artifacts. Then we have the Mirror of Galadriel. Pay 5 mana and tap it to scry 1, then draw a card, but it costs 1 less for every single legendary creature we control. So 9 times out of 10, this is going to have a discount of 2 or 3, which is a good rate of return. That's basically an endless atlas that also has a scry attached to it. It's perfect. But we are a deck based on attacking, and sometimes we want to be able to attack with a creature early and also drop a creature later on the board with Jeru and Hazet. So to facilitate that, we have 3 haste enablers. Starting with Nahiri's Resolve, all creatures we have get 1/0 in haste, and at the beginning of our end step, exile any number of non-token artifacts or creatures and return them to the battlefield at the beginning of our next upkeep. Or at the beginning of your next upkeep. So this is a way to make sure that our cards are safe from sorcery speed removal while also being a haste enabler. And it lets us reuse ETB effects like the one that blows up other people's legendary creatures and some other stuff we're going to talk about here in a second. So Nahiri's Resolve, just a fantastic card for this deck. Rising of the Day, legendary creatures get 1/0 and all creatures we control get haste. Goro the Disciple gives all creatures we have haste if we pay 1 mana into it. And also we can create a 5/5 red dragon spirit token if we've attacked with a modified creature. Any creature with an equipment, aura, or a counter is modified. And we have an equipment in the deck. We have a couple of equipments in the deck, and also we have the ability to modify with 1/1 counters with the dungeon, so Goro is going to be able to get us there pretty easily. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk about how we are going to be modifying the power and toughness of our legendary creatures so that they can get in and do their job. Beginning with Nadar, Selfless Paladin. That's right, it's more dungeon shenanigans. Nadar, everybody. ETB, make sure that we go into the dungeon, and anytime it attacks, we also go into the dungeon. Other creatures we have get 1/1 as long as we've completed the dungeons. That's our first lord. Adriana, Captain of the Guard, gives all of our creatures melee, which means every time they swing, for every opponent we're swinging at, we get 1/1 onto all of them. Flargon, Dean of Chaos, lets us discard a card and draw a card, or we can pay 4 and tap it to reveal cards on the top of our library until we reveal a non-legendary non-land card with mana value 3 or less and cast that card. But we're not using that side usually. We're playing Augusta, the Dean of Order. All of our tapped creatures get 1/0 and our untapped creatures get 0/1, and every time we attack, untap each creature we control, then tap any number of creatures we control. So this lets us, if we decide to go in a tap-untap direction with the deck in upgrades, this gives us a really, really cool drum bellower style effect for that, while also just being a fantastic card for just getting in there, having extra power on all of our things, and getting untapped triggers over and over and over again. All right. Next, we have the Day of Destiny. 4 mana, all legendary creatures we control get 2/2. Then we have Kong Ming, the Sleeping Dragon. All creatures we have get 1/1. Hero's Podium. Every legendary creature we have gets 1/1 for each other legendary creature we have. And then we can pay X and tap it to look at the top X of our library, get a legendary card from among them, put it into our hand, the rest at the bottom of the library. So a second copy of our commander, and also just that with 3 or 4 legendaries on the board, the card becomes bonkers. Then we have Hero's Blade. Equipped creature gets 3/2. Whenever a legendary touches the board, we can just auto-attach the Hero's Blade to it. Use it to give some of our cards extra toughness so Ashling doesn't kill them, or use this to make sure cards like Zatalpa get in there and hit for big. Nadar is also great with this because making sure he's a 6/5 with Vigilance and just punching over and over again is great. But legendary creatures are lightning rods for removal, so let's go ahead and talk about how we are circumventing removal real quick. Redemption Arc gives any creature indestructible, and we can also use it to exile an enchanted creature. So this lets us pay 5 mana to exile any creature on the board, or pay 3 mana and give one of our creatures indestructible, with the downside that it is going to have to attack every turn, which is fine for us. Gilrain lets us basically blink a creature away. We can either have it immediately come back or come back later with a vigilance counter and a lifelink counter on it if we're trying to dodge things like board wipes. Fantastic card. I run it in Pantlaza. I love it. Mirror Shield gives a creature 0/2 and hexproof and basically immunity to death touch. Champion's Helm gives a creature 2/2 and hexproof if it is legendary, which our whole board is. And then we have Tegan Yavanka. Tegan says whenever you attack, target attacking historic creature gets 1/1 and then gains indestructible until end of turn. So use this to make sure that a problematic card people are going to try to sink a bunch of death touch stuff into will always be safe. But let's say you lose those cards. That happens in a game of Magic. We need to account for that too. So we have 2 methods of recursion, starting with Tashar. Whenever we cast a historic spell, return a creature with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Very easy to repeat and abuse in this deck. And then we have Lauren, Disciple of History. Whenever she or another legendary creature ETBs, return any artifact from our graveyard to our hand. Our deck has 19 artifacts, so it's very, very easy to find stuff to use here. And then finally, we got to talk about the land section because you need to make sure your lands are doing the most work for you. In the dual land section, we have Command Tower, Sacred Peaks, Fury Calm Snarl, and Boros Garrison. Garrison's a bounce land, which is helpful, and Sacred Peaks is searchable with Core Cartographer. Remember, you can use bounce lands to re-get effects from cards like our landing card that can just deal 1 damage to things if we need it to. You can also use it to get back MDFCs who dropped on the board. I like bounce lands. I used to hate them, but I like them now. Then in the fetching lands section, we have 7 to speak of. Terramorphic Expanse, Escape, Tunnel, and Evolving Wilds are all the same card. Sacrifice them, go into your deck, get a land. Promising Veins, Shire Terrace, and Naya Panorama are all the same card as well. Sack it, go and get one of the lands that the deck needs out of the deck and put it onto the battlefield. And then Myriad Landscape is effectively a ramping land for us. Then in the utility land section, we also have Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion. Tap it to add a colorless or pay for and tap it to give a creature we have double strike until end of turn. Easy way to close out the game. Past that, we have 12 basic plains and 12 basic mountains, concluding with a deck that is $14.43 total. Now, the biggest question you're going to have, though, is upgrades. This is a deck that has an infinite number of upgrade paths depending on which type of deck you want to go with. We went with a very basic, let's go ahead and swing cards at our opponent and let's go ahead and deal lots of combat damage style deck, and there's a lot of avenues you can take with that alone. So we're going to stick with that right now. So, starting with the removal and interaction section, I would take cards like Make Your Move and Disenchant and swap them out for cards like Get Lost and Stroke of Midnight. Just more modular removal that you have access to. It just works out better for that in the long run. In the ramp section, we would start taking cards like Mere Convert and the Diamonds and swapping them out for things like Boros Signet, Soul Ring, stuff that will allow us to have easier access to that mana over time. Protection area is generally fine, but a Teferi's Protection would still... A Teferi's Protection and a Clever Concealment would go very well here over and above something like Tegan, for instance, or even Redemption Arc, because those cards will let us protect our entire board from stuff. As far as anything else in the deck, the issue you're going to run into, again, is that there's a billion ways you can take this, but if I were to suggest one card that can do a lot of work in the deck, or a couple cards, I would definitely suggest the Aurelia that gives you extra combat phases, because if you have access to extra mana, that is more cards you can get off the top of your deck with Jeru. If you can get the deck to be a lower mana cost legendary deck, then getting Jeru to give you multiple instances of his effect can be very, very helpful. But we're not going to get into specific upgrades for this particular deck as much because, again, like I said, the issue is that you can go in an infinite number of directions with a Legendary Matters deck. They can be anything you want them to be, and that is one of the benefits of a deck like this, is it can be anything you want it to be. But if I were to suggest a couple of specific cards to look out for, I might suggest getting a Strionic Resonator or a Lithoform Engine, cards that will let us reuse the abilities of our multiple legendary creatures that are touching the board over and over again, and also let us reuse our commander's ability if we need to. Those will do a lot of work for us, and I don't think anybody is going to be upset if we are using those particular cards. The Resonators tend to be big targets on the board, but they also do a lot of work in decks that are based almost entirely on reusing and abusing triggered abilities. So, with that all said, let me know what you guys think of Jeru and Hazet. I think you're going to have a fun time playing them, honestly, and I look forward to getting more videos out on the channel. I'm sorry that there was such a long hiatus, everybody. That said, thank you all for watching. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you all in the next one. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sajit, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.